They didn't have rubber. As far as I know. However. So, quiz question that we had last class was what?
The Earth orbits the sun, the sun orbits.
Yes. Did anybody get the point I was trying to make? That it basically is model-dependent realism, or the idea of what we often refer to as things like a Weltanschauung, which is German for the world appearance. Welt and Schauung, how it shows, right? You know, and lots of other expressions for that. That unless you have, and today I would say a narrative. So unless you have a story that explains why you're here, you know, the whole business, and within that context, you've got everything explained for you, at least temporarily. Might be constantly changing as you learn more and so on. But within that context, you have that structures a model, and then within that model, you might have, you know, all the tools that you need in order to achieve your goals, right? And today I would argue that what we have, thanks to people like Stephen Hawking, and of course many, many people throughout our history, is the idea that our consciousness needs concepts in order for us to think. Those concepts are in a particular language, and then we have a particular narrative within that language that structures the way we think of the world, and we clearly perceive it as a result of that filter, so that people have been measured, and you know, psychologists have measured people, and you end up with a clear indication that people see what they believe they're going to see because of the model they already believe. And it's not that that's fake. That is actually reality, right? It's their way of perceiving reality. There might be multiple ways of perceiving reality. The neatest thing about our contemporary perspective is that we know that we have multiple ways of perceiving reality, and as a result, we can switch from one model to another depending on what tool we need to accomplish a particular task. So we might think of being able to say that, yes, it's true that the Earth goes around the sun. You know, from the perspective of standing out off the Earth and looking at the way we depict the solar system, yep, you could see, you know, that's how that works. We also have the perspective of knowing that if we're standing on the Earth and looking, you know, everything looks like it's going around the Earth. Granted, this doesn't explain mass, you know, and you have to figure that, well, the sun and all the other, the whole universe is literally spinning around a fixed Earth. That's silly, but if what you want to think about is the importance of our Earth for ourselves, and that you are the center of the universe as you perceive it, that's, you know, all makes sense. And you can figure that out in a way that's the Tycho Brahe, or the Tychonic model, that puts everything in that, you know, fixes the problems of the Earth-centered system where the planets were also going around the Earth and they don't. So that Tycho Brahe fixed that. And the church was happy with that, you know, because that wasn't offensive. They didn't want the Earth to be a little thing spinning around out there. It was essential that the Earth was considered the center of the universe. You know, this is where God put us, and we're the whole, you know, we're the whole story, you know, basically. But you also have other models, right? You have the model of Einstein that gives us the time-space light cone model. Have you seen that? I don't know if I presented that to anybody, but you can go and look at Einstein, old one mug, right? Lots of different variants on this. There's one that I like that's my favorite. You have, yeah, like this one. we have, each of us have our own little light cone. So, and we're proximate to one another. So your image of the universe and mine are pretty close, and so on. The interesting thing about that is all of time and space exist at once. So that in this model, movement is actually an illusion of consciousness. So there's all that kind of. So basically what we have are all these different models, and they all work from a particular need for using them, right, to explain different things. So the powerful view today is to have the view that these are all, well, you might not say true because they're theories, and theories are neither true nor false, literally, right? But at the same time, what we want to say is these are all useful, good models. Some are better than others in different contexts, So the powerful thing is knowing which tool to use for which job. If you're going to build a building, you want to use the Euclidean geometric system because that works perfectly well. If you're trying to get a craft to fly to Mars, you need to use hyperbolic geometry because that's the geometry of curved spaces, but it's much more complex. It takes a lot more computer power. If you were building a building using that, it's a waste of time. There's no point in doing that, right? You don't need that kind of precision. It doesn't really work, actually, not on the Earth. And yet, one of the things about Euclidean geometry is that, and these are all axiomatic systems, by the way, and axioms, for example, and I love this one. Let me do this here. Euclid, Elements. That's the book that he's famous for. This one. So Euclid's Elements. He was after Aristotle, but if we go and look at his definitions, these are really, I think of them as axioms. An axiom means you can't doubt it, no doubt. And so, for example, definition 1, a point is that which has no parts. So what exactly would that be? This is a mathematical point, right? Everybody here does mathematics. You've had some mathematics. So what have you been told a point is? You do this in
one-dimensional marking graph as the depth.
Yeah, one-dimensional. I've not heard that, but I mean, it has no parts, so basically it's invisible. Not even sure it has a dimension. Would that?
You can see it, theoretically you can see it on a plane that you're looking at flat on, but you can see it in two-dimensional.
Well, that would be something that has parts. If you could see it, it would have parts because you could, if I put a point on this plane here, I'll just put a point there. You can see it. Get big enough, right? And if I have a line, next one, a line is a series of points, right? Right? And the ends of a line are points, right? So theoretically this is a line, but actually this is a symbol of a line that has dimension. It's actually three-dimensional. It has a shape this way. It's not very wide. It has shape and it has depth. If you use a microscope to look at it, of course, because it's a actual physical thing. I don't think you can have anything that's physical unless it's three-dimensional. Yes? even a vision on a screen would be three-dimensional. I was watching Taylor Swift doing the role that she had in Cats in the 2019 movie, and I was fascinated because I know they used a lot of CGI. Is that right? CGI. It's a computer graphic. What's the I stand for? Image? Computer graphic image? But her tail was like, doing all kinds of things that obviously they weren't using wires and so on. But when I'm looking at that image, it's actually got depth, although it's incredibly. But so a real point, by definition, has no parts. So this is just a symbolic representation of a point. But a point has no parts. That keeps coming up later on when we talk about Gottfried Leibniz. Leibniz will point out that monads, he calls them monads, have no parts. So there's that same Euclidean definition. And where does that come from? Socrates, in one of the articles, the dialogues that we'll look at today, refers to the soul as having no parts, right? And as a result, the soul can't be put together, because when you put something together, you take various parts and you put them together, and now you have a thing. Before that, it was apart, right? And then when you destroy something, you take it apart, right? And as a result, Socrates will give us the argument that a soul has no parts, and it's invisible, and as a result, it also isn't created, because you can't create something that has no parts, nor can it be destroyed. And as a result, by definition, from Plato, from Socrates, and it might have, of course, been an earlier point of view that others have had, that a soul is eternal. Can't be made, can't be destroyed. We think of souls as actually, if you think you have a soul, in fact, that'll be my next quiz question. Do you have a soul, and what is it? If you think so, right? So that'll be, I'm way ahead of myself here. Because today's quiz question I gave you last class too, and that was, if Jesus comes to your home and knocks at the door and says, sell everything you have, give it away to the poor, and come with me, do you go with him or not? I asked you that, right? I mentioned it. That'll be today's. But that's based on the Euthyphro, which I already discussed a little bit, right? And so if we go back to axioms which are undoubtable, you can't prove that, by the way. You can't prove that a point is that which has no parts. You either believe it or you don't, right? So axioms mean you believe them. If you don't believe them, you can't do math. Right? It's kind of fun, right? There are folks that think we only ought to teach science in schools, and what they mean by that is empirical sciences, where you can show things are the case, because then you know that this is the case. Well, they're wrong in thinking that we actually know that stuff, because when we're talking empirically, it's always a guess, because it's always inductive reasoning. And in fact, the things that we really know most certainly are things like mathematics, which is not an empirical science, but instead faith-based. So you have to believe in the axioms. Anybody think that I'm wrong? That's totally crazy? It seems so obvious to me, but I don't know. I've heard people giving a presentation. We all ought to only teach science, so that the students know. While scientia means knowledge, yes, we should only be teaching knowledge. However, there's a lot of knowledges out there that are not empirical science. And math is clearly one of those. But so, that's kind of neat. Well, the apology ends with Socrates being condemned to death, and he has to wait for the ship to come back. They have to ask the gods permission to execute somebody, and that means sailing to a particular island where there's the priesthood that, yes, you could do that. Actually, they wouldn't have gone like across. That didn't happen yet. But in any case, the word comes back, yes, the gods have approved Socrates' death. And so the first dialogue that occurs after the apology is called the